Alright, welcome to Lecture 5. This is a screencast, so I'll be showing you a few documents and analyzing them with you. You're on the Recommendation Report project, which is a big project, our major one of this course. And the one thing it doesn't require, because this is a summer online course, is a lot of collaboration. Now, typically I assign this project in groups of 2 and make it a little longer. So this one's a little different, and you're missing on that collaborative element, but I hope you'll kind of try to understand that. So let me go through one example of that type of collaboration with you, and then you can see an actual document that I've composed, and then I'm going to take you through the process of composing your logic box diagram. So what you see on the screen is a report that I composed a couple years ago, and it was developed within an academic committee. So several professors were on a committee together, and we had to figure out what we were going to do with this thing that OC used to have called Freshman Seminar. So we created a task force. This is the document that I created as a result of it. I'll just kind of skim through it. You can see it has multiple people in the from line. If you remember your email assignment, the CC, how multiple people are involved in many projects, and that's really important because you have to think about who they are, what their positions are, and how that changes the document and how it's written. Notice it has a title. It's composed as a memo. This particular one is Dear Committee Members, or as kind of a memo email hybrid. And this document succeeded in some ways, but failed in other ways. You notice here I'm providing recommendations. And so the focus of this was to really give some options. There's option 1. It's not a long document. You can see option 2. And then there wasn't a third option. In fact, there was just, after that, some explanation for, or rationale for why it was given. And then there was a bit of an appendix there at the end. I will tell you, this was not my biggest success. So the trouble was that the third time I read it, I still found a typo. And that actually made it to when I presented it to one of the more important academic committees on campus, which was quite embarrassing. And then when I did present the recommendations, one of the people in the committee who I was presenting to was very confused under the second option about these 3 choices and about whether the third choice was actually a legitimate choice. So I was pummeled with questions. And for me, it was a failure, but it was a learning experience. You have to be incredibly careful with your language. And I thought I had been, but I needed more revision. I needed more collaboration. Okay, so maybe you can kind of see, I've dealt with this too. It's tough. So give yourself plenty of time to work on this and make sure you understand kind of all the issues at play, the context, the requirements of the genre, and also the people to whom it's being written. And we'll focus on that a little bit more later in this unit. Okay, I want to run through a PowerPoint with you. It's called Composing a Logic Box Diagram, because this is going to be one of your tasks. So I thought it might be helpful for you to see the process of going through and creating this diagram, because the diagram is evidence that you've thought through the whole process of the recommendation report correctly. And that's why we're doing this now, early on in the process. Unfortunately, the recommendation report is not the type of document that you can just put together the night before. It takes a lot of preamble, a lot of thinking through it, and the strongest ones tend to have a very clear structure. And again, I'm using the word process again, moving from problem to solution. So you're going to need to think through the process of your whole project. Look at Markel's model on 343, and then that logic box diagram on 345. Those are very important pages. Okay. So some additional resources in order to create this diagram. So Word has some diagram drawing resources, and they're okay. They're not good. Google Draw is even better. You can get to it through your Google Drive account, on your OC account. It's called an add-on. You search for it. It's also called draw.io. And you just pull it up, and you can create these flowcharts. And that's the one that I'm going to show you today. Now, if you have a lot of money, Visio is a software program that probably is the best. But you have to pay for it, and I'm not requiring it. So for our purposes, I recommend you use Google Draw, draw.io, and then you can export that into a JPEG, which is a type of picture file, and you can put that in your actual report. And I'm going to show you an example of mine in just a minute. So part of your success in the recommendation report is taking that time to make sure you understand the software. So writing and diagrams is part of writing. So you really need to make sure you go through the tutorial and do whatever you need to do to understand the ins and outs of the program that you use to create the diagram. Okay, so when you're thinking through your project as a whole, you want to think about it in terms of problem solution, right? You are finding some problem at the nonprofit you're studying, and you're going to propose a solution to that. So here's my example, and you might remember Oklahoma Humanities. So my problem is through Oklahoma Humanities, few people have a place to go to get a nonpartisan, free discussion of ethics and philosophy. Now, that problem fits within the mission of Oklahoma Humanities, and that's one reason it's a good problem, because they care about philosophy. It's in their mission statement that says that they're supposed to educate the community about philosophy. And the problem is they don't really do that through a particular avenue. So it's a problem. It can be solved. So what are the criteria for a solution? And that's where you need to think next. Now, maybe you're already thinking of solutions, but it's more beneficial to you to think through criteria for a good solution first. So what can make your solution good? What are the requirements for your solution? What does it have to do? Here are mine. I've got several. Should teach the public about the major tenets of philosophy and ethics. Okay, that seems obvious. Should be accessible to the public. Okay, may have not been your first thought. Should be free to the public. OH is sponsored by federal grant money and it needs to be free. Should include expertise. So not just, your uncle talking about his philosophy, but someone who is an accepted authority. And then it should engage the public, right? Who wants to go listen to some boring lecture about logic box diagrams? Okay, that was a joke. But you get the idea. Logic is usually not considered the most interesting topic. And then it should be applicable to contemporary topics. And maybe this is optional. We'll see. But it seems like you want it to be relevant. So you don't want philosophy to just kind of be so abstract that it doesn't matter. Okay, so those are my criteria. Next, I'm not moving straight to the solution. I'm analyzing the criteria. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot one. Should be cost efficient. Obviously. So, now we analyze the criteria. And the way we do that is we either dub them necessary or desirable. And I'm using colors to indicate this, and it looks kind of overly colorful for a PowerPoint, but anyway, take it for what you will. So, look which ones I've made red and which ones I've made purple. All of them are red except should engage the public and should be applicable to contemporary topics. To me, those two are desirable. And if I wanted to, I could organize these by putting those two at the end. So obviously, desirable are less important than necessary. And you could certainly debate me on this. You could say, well, is expertise really necessary? As long as other people are talking about it, then maybe it's okay. Okay, that's fine. However you want to categorize these is fine with me. There's probably not going to be one where I'm like, well, that's obviously desirable. What were you thinking? If it's debatable, I can understand that. Okay, so you've analyzed them and color-coded them. Next, think of some options that fit the criteria. Now, you're only required to have two options. You're welcome to have more. In fact, sometimes it makes sense to have more, but sometimes a third option that you can include without doing a whole lot of extra work is to say, do nothing. Because sometimes doing nothing can actually satisfy some of the criteria. And you'll see that in just a second. Option 1, proposing a new program. It's called Public Ethics Lecture and Debate. It's modeled off a program that Oklahoma Humanities already had called Let's Talk About It Oklahoma. So they get a scholar, they meet at a university, there's what happens once per month, 12 ethics discussions per year, and it's free. It will cost Oklahoma Humanities about $10,000 a year, though. Okay, that's one option. Option 2, new program, Ethics and Pottery. It's like those wine and paint classes, but it contains a fee to pay for it. So you obviously have to pay for the wine, pay for the pottery and the wheels and such. The idea is an instructor will teach pottery, pinch pots, not wheel pots, and then a scholar will lead a discussion of ethics. I would show that research demonstrates that the pottery has therapeutic effects and will put people in the mood for discussing serious issues in a respectful way. Okay, there are two options, right? You can imagine both of these working and essentially solving that core mission of we need a place in this nonprofit to discuss philosophy in a public way. So let's analyze those based on the criteria. So you compare the options, right? Which option meets more necessary and, if possible, more desirable criteria. Okay, so the new program, Ethics Lecture and Debate, meets these criteria. So quite a few, right? And you can debate how engaging it is, right? Some people might say, oh, it's not a very engaging one. Pottery would be much more engaging. So you can see it looks like it meets 7 of the criteria. Now let's look at option 2. There we go. Notice there are two that I've had to cut out here because it's not free and it's not cost efficient. Debatable. You might say it is cost efficient. Okay, and again, I'm willing to figure the ins and outs of that with you. So we've compared our two options. Now we've analyzed the results. The addition of $10,000 a year means that either the National Endowment for the Humanities grant funding or individual donations will have to increase if we do the first option. If NEH funding is dropped, OH has even more to lose. But still, despite those constraints, option 1 meets more of the necessary criteria. Option 2 meets more of the desirable criteria. Where that first option, it was debatable whether one of the desirable criteria was met. So because necessary criteria are more important than desirable criteria, because both incur similar costs and risks, option 1 will be the recommendation. Makes sense? So you come up with your criteria, develop options based on those criteria, and then analyze which option is best according to the criteria. Now, I've turned this into a diagram, and this is your actual logic box diagram that I'm asking you to create. Okay? And notice it's still in process. Okay, I don't have quite all the arrows. I wanted to show you something that's kind of not quite done, but has the main basic parts, and I've had to shrink it so it'll fit on this PowerPoint slide. Ideally, it should be a little longer, not quite so cluttered if possible. So I've got the problem on the left. I'm not going to repeat everything because I've already said it. And then to the right of the problem, I have the criteria. We have arrows going from the problem to the criteria. The criteria are color-coded. Notice it's pretty clear-cut. It was hard. It took me probably an extra hour to get everything kind of in place so you could read it clearly. And then again, this is on Google Draw. And then those criteria have arrows, color-coded arrows to the two options. And notice I've added that third option, do nothing, which actually solves two of the criteria, should be free to the public, and is cost efficient, right? So, if that was more important to the Board of Trustees, then they could say do nothing. And then the recommendation. So we move from the option to the recommendation. The recommendation is option 1. And I've got a little legend there to explain the criteria. Okay, so this, to me, mine is probably like kind of a B level right now. It's not quite an A. So, again, I want to kind of show you how I was mid-process there. And if yours has to take 2 pages and you need to cut it in half, that's understandable. Whatever you need to do, probably you're going to want to make it landscape rather than portrait. All right. So, again, I'm not showing you how to actually run Google Draw. You can figure that out, right? Let me know if you do have specific questions. I think they have their own tutorial on that page. So, I would go ahead and get started. Doing the diagram will help you figure out your whole project. And you may need to do research while you're working on that. And this will probably take you the most amount of time in this project. So spend time on it, and then once you actually start writing the paper, you won't be like, oh, what in the world am I saying? It'll actually fit this model very clearly with all the sections required of the recommendation report. All right, I hope this was helpful to you, and good luck on this project.